Welcome to another episode of Primetime Crime. Happy Friday. I'm your host, Lauren Conlin.
And I'm Jarrett Ferentino.
Jarrett, so we pre-record this show, and I just want to put it out there that I am hoping and praying that by today, which is Friday, the jury has come to their conclusion on whether or not Karen Read is guilty or innocent. I really, really hope that the verdict is out. What do you think? Do you think it'll be out by Friday?
Well, let me say this. I stopped trying to predict what juries are going to do and how long they're going to be out a long time ago. It's hard to say. I would think, though, by Friday, we will have some kind of answers. It could be not guilty, could be guilty, and it could be a hung jury. Who knows? I mean, remember, this case was all over the board, but I don't know. I just don't see a guilty verdict in the offing here.
I'm with you. I don't see one. But again, I kind of thought we would have something by Wednesday night. I really, really did. I thought so, just based on crash daddies. That's what everybody's calling them now. And it's such a good word for these experts. I'm sorry. They are crash daddies.
You know, so the crash daddies, that is awesome. But waiting for a verdict, the anticipation. So when that happens, you get done with a case. Let's say you had a case that lasted months, right? There's this relief that comes in. It's almost like you just took your test. It's over. And there's this part of you that there's nothing left. If you feel like your side put in everything you can possibly put in, your witnesses were prepared and performed as planned, really it's in the hands of a jury. So there's a piece of relief that you feel, but the longer it goes on, like in our situation, I would sit with like the reporters and kind of just chill out, like loosen my tie. But as time goes on, you start to get that anxiety just creeps back in, and you start thinking like, oh my God, you know, what's going on back there? Fortunately, many of my verdicts had come back quickly. But there were occasions where I was waiting for days, and those were pretty sleepless nights. So you have that sense of relief that fades really quick. I know that's a little inside baseball. And then when it's over, it's a big deal, and it feels great. And you return to work a day or two later, and everybody forgets about your case. So
I was going to ask you, you said days, but what's the longest that you've ever had to wait for a verdict?
The longest I had to wait was the largest case in my career, and it was 2.5 days. And I felt, but the trial itself was 2 months. I felt so strong. It was the Hugo Selinski case. So when I felt like we were in such a good position, I really didn't get anxious probably until that 2.5 day. But I still felt good. I felt like everything had gone our way and we were going to be okay. But if it went into a third day, I would have been worried.
I know, right? Oh my gosh. We'll have to do another episode, a full episode on the Hugo Selinski case. And I know that you just did one with the guys over at True Crime Cast. I love those guys. So
They're
shout
great.
out to them. Yeah, they're wonderful. So everybody will have to go listen to that episode. But let's pivot while we're in the state of Massachusetts here, because there's another case that's out of Stoughton, Massachusetts. And actually, this young woman who tragically passed away, she actually lived in Canton, which is where John O'Keefe passed away as well. And this is the case of Sandra Birchmore. And so Sandra Birchmore, she grew up without a father figure. And then when she was a teenager, her mother and her grandmother who raised her, they passed away. So she had a tough time. But she joined the Explorers program with her local police department, the Stoughton Police Department. And I believe she joined that at the age of 13.
Yes, 13.
Unfortunately, by the age of 15, she was being essentially groomed and was having sexual relations with 2 brothers, Matthew and William Farwell. And later, she was having relations with this other officer, Robert Devine.
And the brothers were police officers as well.
Correct. Oh, did I not say that? I should have said that from the start. Yes, these were police officers, these brothers. And it went on for a long time. They are obviously now denying in the wake of her death, which was in 2021, that they didn't have any sort of sexual relationship with Sandra when she was underage. I believe that that is not true, that they did. Sandra told all of her friends. And so Sandra, when she passed away 3 years ago, she was 23 years old and she was 3 months pregnant with Matthew Farwell's baby. And she had told her friends that Matthew was the father. And Matthew is married with children. He had told Sandra he did not want this baby. He wanted her to get rid of it. And if not, he wanted nothing to do with her or the child. And so they essentially broke up, and she was fine. She told her friends she was excited to raise the baby on her own. It was giving her life purpose, meaning. And Matthew Farwell was the last person seen leaving her apartment in Canton. And a few days later, she didn't show up to work. And they did a wellness check at her apartment, and they found that she had died by suicide. I will say allegedly. She had tied a lanyard, allegedly, to a doorknob and obviously to her neck, and she was hung. And the state obviously and immediately did rule it a suicide. That's what it looked like. And, it was interesting. A lot of people were like, this is strange. She didn't have any signs of suicide. She didn't talk about being depressed. She actually talked about being happy and excited. And so next thing you know, her estate, and I believe that's her aunt, her estate is suing. They put 3 civil suits out against Robert Devine and the Farwell brothers and the Staunton Police Department. So they're suing for wrongful death at this point, saying that she was groomed, she was bullied, she was depressed. And a few days ago, it came out that her family, her estate, hired Dr. Michael Baden to look at her autopsy, look at all the reports, which in Massachusetts, they don't release the autopsy reports or to the public. So, I've never seen them. But he said, no, she didn't die by suicide. It was strangulation. And it's also been confirmed by the Boston Globe maybe 2 months ago that the FBI is also looking into the Birchmore case. And there's a lot of the same Massachusetts State Police that, or not, maybe not a lot, I guess, but there's 2 I can name off the top of my head that were involved in Sandra's investigation and Karen Reed's, or John O'Keefe's, I should say. But that's Officer Michael Lank and Yuri Buchanan. So it's got a lot of the same elements, I guess, involving alleged police corruption, cover up. And Sandra Birchmore, I will say my opinion on this. I do not believe that she died by suicide. So I can read to you, I would love for you to weigh in, but I can read to you parts of what Dr. Baden said about this and why he doesn't believe it's suicide.
Well, I had occasion to review what was a summary of Dr. Baden's report. So let me say that. So there's two things that jump out at me here. First of all, that was a great summary of the case. So
thank you so much.
But I did review much of what is out there. Full disclosure, Dr. Baden and I have worked together on my cases in the past. And ironically, this case, Dr. Baden is saying that Sandra's hyoid bone in her neck was fractured. And he is saying that typically in a suicidal hanging, you do not have a fracturing of the hyoid bone. Ironically, I had a strangulation case with Dr. Baden with a fractured hyoid bone. And in my case, our victims were one victim was strangled to death with a flex tie ligature, okay? And Dr. Baden actually opens up the neck. He conducted the autopsies in my case, opened up the neck and the esophagus area of our victims and noted the fracture in the hyoid bone. And there were 2 different directions of fracture. There was one that went upward this way, and for those that are listening, I'm basically pointing from the front of my neck up toward my head, and one that went straight back to the back of the neck. And Dr. Baden concluded that that was consistent with repeated engagement of the ligature, pulling it up in one direction, back in another. What he's concluding with regard to Sandra Birchmore is a fractured hyoid bone is not typically seen, although it is seen, albeit rarely, in the kinds of suicides with a ligature and tied around a doorknob in the manner in which Sandra Birchmore died. He looked at that, and although he's a forensic pathologist and a doctor, you're not blind to the attending circumstances of a case either.
Right.
He looks and says, there's no letter, which he has seen in suicidal cases. He is under the things you talked about where Sandra was excited to have this child, for example.
Yeah, yeah.
Those are things that there is the prospect of a bright future for Sandra. She sees a plan ahead of her. Now, her life was tragic. She joined the Explorer program trying to find direction, trying to find leadership and parental figures. And she was sexually abused and preyed upon by leaders in that program. That's not in dispute. What's in dispute is her death. And I think if you look at the attendant circumstances here, these officers were preying upon her. She had a future plan to have this child. Now Dr. Bodden's saying that this death is not consistent with suicide. This is something that is being looked at by the feds. They're also looking at whether or not there could be charges as a result of these relationships with these three officers, even though Sandra is deceased. Can they take the texts? Can they build a prosecution? So there is a whole lot going on here. I don't know that I'm willing to make that. I trust Dr. Bodden. I think he does a great job. I've relied on him in the past, but without seeing the initial report, which hasn't been released, it's kind of hard to compare the two. All I could say is, in my experience, when Dr. Bodden draws a conclusion on the fracturing of a hyoid bone, I listen.
Okay, so I agree with that. He's wonderful. He's got a lot of experience. I mean, the guy's almost 90, but I was recently very concerned with his testimony in the Christopher Greger trial, who was on trial for the murder of his son, Corey, who was 6. And yeah, Corey had the crap kicked out of him over time. And then obviously we know about the what I am going to say was the fatal treadmill blows to the head and to the chest. And he had pneumonia a few weeks prior. And Dr. Bodden said, yeah, he probably died of natural causes. And I believe that is what made the jury rule or deliberate and come to the conclusion that Christopher Greger should be charged with manslaughter and not murder. So I did not like that. And again, I'm not in the medical field, and maybe I just didn't like that outcome.
You're not a trained pathologist?
No, I'm not. Not at all. Yeah. Aren't you surprised? Who would ever let me do that? Oh my gosh. But yeah, no, so I wasn't happy about that. And I did not agree with that. And I knew he was paid, he's got to make a living. So that upset me. So I do kind of wish her family hired someone else. But I want justice for Sandra. I want justice for her unborn child. And going back to this investigation, what's crazy is that they collected evidence, but it didn't seem to be tested. As in, like, they actually have fetal tissue, but they did not test to confirm that the father was Matthew Farwell, which would be, in my opinion, motive to potentially murder. So why didn't they do that? Why? It's things that you think about, make you go, with the Massachusetts State Police.
Well, and the only thing I could say about that,
people get mad, but
either it's corruption or laziness. Yeah. Either way, be better. I mean, right now they are under intense scrutiny, the police in Boston and Massachusetts, because of these cases. And when you have 3 officers, former officers, by the way, these individuals have been relieved of their duty one way or another. When you have these 3 individuals engaged in an inappropriate relationship with this young woman who was a minor at the time these relationships began, and then you have a failure to really thoroughly investigate this case, it leads you to speculate and to start looking into, well, why? Why weren't these questions answered? Oftentimes you could have a bad seed in a police department, okay? But the good people at the top are supposed to do the right thing then. And Even laziness can be viewed as corruption. And a failure to look deeply into this leaves a real bad taste in my mouth as far as anybody's willingness to go forward and truly investigate this death. And again, I agree with you. Dr. Boden's testimony in the Gregor case was unsettling to me as well. But again, a lot of it is semantics too. Like in the Gregor case, I thought what ultimately killed Corey in that case could have been a pneumonia caused by or led to ultimately by his guard being down physically and a condition really contributed by the blows and the abuse that he had. So it's hard to say. I think sometimes it gets like lawyer world where we're playing with semantics too. In any event,
that's a good point.
In any event, as human beings, you're left with this. You look at this Birchmore case. Predators, as we've discussed in the past, they know when there's blood in the water. They look at Sandra Birchmore, this young girl who probably looked up to Divine and these other officers and thought they're heroes to her. They're leaders to her. They were just, they were in charge of this camp and they abused that power. Anybody who's capable of that kind of abuse is capable of anything, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate, when I was describing Sandra's situation, I probably should have described it as sexual abuse and not sexual relations, because when you're of a certain age, like 13 or 14, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know that this is wrong, that this man is taking advantage of you. I'm sorry, maybe in the back of your mind, you can sense that something's wrong, but you don't really know what you're talking about. And so I just want to be sensitive to that. It was definitely abuse. It was not.
Well, and certainly at some point it was, and then it carried on into adulthood. And then the brothers were kind of sharing her. It's a crazy situation. And
sad.
I only hope that if a case could be put together for that sexual abuse, it is put together and they're pursued. Whether or not they're going to get to a homicide situation with Dr. Boden's findings, that's really a tougher call. But you and I are going to continue to follow this one. This one has got a lot of moving parts.
It does. And I was really happy to see that the Stoughton police chief, she's a woman, and she was very receptive to Dr. Boden's findings. And she was saying, this is horrifying and we're going to dig deeper into this. And she put out a statement. So I thought that was great. That was a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there is a receptiveness in that department to take a hard look at this now. So who knows? Maybe we will see the case move forward.
Yeah, let's see. We will both follow it. But for the second half of the show, I wanted to bring our listeners. I've covered this story a lot on my own podcast with Nancy Grace, but it's the case of these two beautiful moms out of Kansas who lost their lives around Easter. We don't know the exact day they lost their lives, but they went missing the day before Easter, and they were found about a week later. And this is the case of Jilian Kelly and Veronica Butler. And this case, Jarrett, it's a bad one. This one kept me up at night, and it still keeps me up at night. And I have a feeling, and we can get to this, that it's going to take a long time for this case to get to trial. Long time. There are 5 suspects that have been arrested at this point. But essentially what happened was Veronica Butler, she and this young man, Wrangler Rickman, they lived in Colorado at one point, Kansas, Oklahoma. This is the Four Corners. So Wrangler and Veronica had 2 children together. They split up, and they had a really, really bad custody battle. So they were going back and forth a lot. Veronica had custody for a certain point, and then she ended up losing custody at the time of her death. And this was because allegedly she had a family member that touched one of the children, I believe. And so, yeah, the kids told this to a family therapist, and the kids got taken away. And listen, they didn't go into detail, but what happened was that this person in the family wasn't supposed to see the kids, and the kids said that, oh, we saw them anyway. But they don't go into detail how long they saw him, if it was like a wave, if it was just like a drive-by. We don't actually know, but that's what caused her to lose her kids. And at this point, her ex, Wrangler Rickman, he can't even take care of the kids. He's partying. He's been arrested, for a gun charge. So he's in and out of jail. He's just not in a great place.
When your first name is Wrangler, you're destined for great things, I think, in the criminal world.
Oh, God. Oh, my God. I didn't even think about that, but that's interesting. So, yeah. So he was getting into some trouble. And so his mother, Tiffany Adams, took over. And she was obsessed with these children. And so Veronica at this point only was able to see them once a week. Tiffany had been canceling sessions. She had not, scheduled any makeups, and she never gave any sort of reason. It was not a great situation. So one Saturday, the regular court appointed therapist, Cheryl Brune, was told not to come. So she didn't. And
told by Tiffany, told by grandma not to come.
So we don't actually know this. Cheryl Brune did interview with the OSBI, and she just said, I didn't come that day. She doesn't really get into much of the details. I've speculated on this. I've looked her up on Facebook. She has connections to the county, the courthouse in Cimarron County, which is where Tiffany is from. And Tiffany was a process server at one point. So I feel like the two knew each other. So in my head, I'm like, ooh, maybe she told her be sick that day. So Veronica had to find someone else. So she found Jilian Kelly, who is a beautiful mother of 5 and a preacher's wife. And she worked at the church that Veronica went to as well. And she said, yeah, you got to be my supervisor for the day. So they drove from Kansas to Oklahoma, and their car was found off the highway about 3 miles from where they were supposed to meet Tiffany and the kids. There were pools of blood found around the car. There was a pair of sunglasses and a broken hammer. And it's incredibly
for
sad.
me, I always look at these cases like a story, right? And this story would begin, it was a van, right? That Veronica was driving, it would begin near that car. And
it was an SUV of some sort.
So if you read, and I've read all the affidavits and the information that's been public thus far in this case, they refer to it as evidence of severe injury near the vehicle and the broken hammer. So we're talking about a bloodletting event near that vehicle. That's like the opening of this case, where you're like, where are they? What the hell happened here? They were confirmed, I think, to be Veronica's glasses that were found. But let me back up a little bit about some of what you've said. So what I've gleaned from the documentation is that Tiffany Adams' grandma basically told Brune not to come that day and requiring Veronica to then get her own supervisor. Now, in a custody situation, this was an ongoing custody situation. There were continuing problems here. So we had a situation where Veronica was asking the court to remove the requirement of supervisory visits with her children. Now, when you have supervisory visits, there's been a problematic finding against you. They're saying you can see your kids, but you have to have a third party approved by the court present with you. Okay? That's no joke. That means a judge looked at this and said, we don't trust you at this moment to be alone with your children. So she's asking to remove that limitation. That is pending. Brune was the typical one that Tiffany would have there as the third party supervisor.
Yes.
She kind of chases her away that day, which in my opinion it was game on. That's intent to get Brune out of the way at a minimum that day. And here's the concern, and this is in the documentation too. Tiffany Adams believes that a member of Veronica's family acted out on one of the children. Now unsupervised, they would be left to their own devices. This individual would be potentially in the area or in a position to harm the children again. That was what Tiffany was telling people. She was concerned about that.
Yes, that is.
And how often are we seeing in our community today where grandparents are raising children? Okay, so Tiffany Adams is raising these children as if they're her own. Wrangler, her son, has had all his own problems in the past. In fact, in the affidavit it says Tiffany has even prevented Wrangler from seeing the kids on occasion.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe she was concluding he was not in a state to see them. She's kept the kids from Wrangler in violation of court orders. So Tiffany Adams, before we even get into the crazy shit that went on in this case, appears to be extremely protective of these children as their grandmother.
Yeah.
So
to a fault. They're not her children. Yeah, and she it's crazy narcissistic behavior. It's control. And yes, she kept her children from Wrangler at a certain, or the children, I'm sorry, from Wrangler at a certain point. And he also, Wrangler, he worked for Tiffany's boyfriend. You're going to hear that name, Tad Cullum, in a few minutes, but he also worked on his farm. So they had a relationship. This just goes back to Tiffany's control issues. But let's go back to the car. So when we hear pools of blood are found, the hammer wasn't necessarily disclosed right away. So some people were like, oh my gosh, they were probably shot based on the pooling of blood. They were due at a birthday party as well. And so Veronica's cousin, Melissa, was like, what the hell, where are they? So Melissa was the first one to find the car, and she was the one who called the police. And so, the women were missing for about a week. And then we hear the news, unfortunately, that they were found, and they were found about 8 miles away. And they were found on a farm, a property that was rented, I guess, by this property owner, or rented by Tad from this guy, Jamie Beasley. Tad was doing some skid steer work or whatever, and the women's bodies were found.
He had some cattle on that farm too, they're saying.
He did, yes, he had cattle, but their bodies were found by a dam about, I want to say, 8 to 10 feet underground, and they were found in a freezer chest. And we don't know what exactly happened, but we know there were stun guns involved. And I'm telling you guys, obviously at a high level, like as this is happening from March to April to May until now, we're finding all of this out week to week. And it is crazy. It's just bombshell after bombshell.
These arrests,
yeah, and so
when these arrests, so there's a group of 5 that were arrested. So you have grandma, her boyfriend. Then you have the Twombleys, which is a couple, and then this guy Grice, who's the 5th. He was subsequently arrested. He's according to the affidavit, has made an admission in this case, by the way. So there's a total of 5 defendants. They refer to themselves. So when you see their picture, I thought about the Rob Zombie movie, The Devil's Rejects. Was it The Devil's Rejects?
Totally. Devil's Rejects.
But they actually refer to themselves as God's Misfits. That's their crew. So this is Tiffany Adams' crew. She has Tad, who's her boyfriend, the Twombleys, who are their friends, and is it Raymond Grice?
No, Paul Grice.
Paul Grice. I'm sorry, Paul Grice.
It's important to note that Paul Grice, it's still a mystery as to why it took them so long to arrest Paul. They talked about 5 suspects in the original affidavits, and everyone's like, cool, where's the 5th? And they mentioned Paul, and they mentioned a couple, Lacey and Barrett Cook, who took the kids, and everyone's like, well, why haven't those people been arrested? And then I think it was maybe 3 weeks later, Paul was arrested.
Well, I could tell you why that happens sometimes. So it's clear Paul was providing information to the investigators. When that is happening, you're trying to figure out ultimately what could have been happening is they're trying to figure out what exactly is he going to be charged with. And we'll predict, that's for a prediction a little later, but let me say this. So we talked about the car, and then 8.5 miles away, the bodies are found. How the hell did we get here, okay? Here's the crazy part. 6 weeks prior to the Kansas moms going missing, Tiffany Adams, who planned this whole thing with these other 4, purchased 3 burner cell phones, okay? So to be used in the ultimate planning, kidnapping, and killing, okay? 6 weeks this planning has been going on. Originally, the Twombly's children, I believe, have acknowledged that there was a previous plan to drop an anvil through Veronica's car, killing her, and that was essentially disavowed. And then there was ongoing plans to kill her. At no time do the 5 individuals say, you know, this might not be a good idea. They stick to the plan. They have these burner phones, which the burner phones are then triangulated and traced. Wouldn't you know it, the phones are near where the car is found, and whoops, 8.5 miles away, same phones where Tad Cullum has his skid steer on Beasley's farm in an area where work was done, and you find the bodies. This is a strong, compelling case. You already clearly have one witness flipping. So this is going nowhere good for the 5, I could tell you that. I feel like these guys have done a great job putting it together. So you found where you could tell that story on a map. Phones triangulate here, they triangulate here. We have Grice, who's a participating witness, hopefully, and then you have the statements that were made to the children of the Twombleys. There was a car cleaned afterwards. There were stun guns purchased a week prior. There were searches related to which appeared to be planning. So all of that prior stuff, and I know I say this a lot, but when I'm putting a homicide prosecution together, there's the moment, but then there's the events leading up to the moment. And how you can recreate where these folks' heads were in that space in the weeks leading up to it. It's like Tiffany Adams, who will probably try to sell herself off as this loving grandma whose goal was to protect her little kids that she was raising from this abusive family member of Veronica's, right? That's going to be their defense if they don't resolve this case. Well, this loving grandma, some 6 weeks before, buys burner phones and has 6 weeks to diabolically plan the murder of Veronica and the murder of Jilian, who really was a bystander in this thing. You know, she wasn't. She certainly didn't harm the children. She was helping Veronica out. So,
well, the witness even asked Cora this. Well, why does Jilian have to go? And she said, oh, because she supports Veronica.
Right.
That was her only. So they can't even use that as a defense. Oh, it was for the kids because you just took somebody else's mother away.
Right.
That had nothing to do with you.
They could try it, that she was blinded by that. But the reality is 6 weeks of planning at a minimum is very significant. All of that, to me, is intent to commit kidnapping, ultimately murder. Then, was it Cullum or one of the Twombleys had a go bag that was found on the property with a gun and some other.
It was Tad.
It was Tad Cullum. So Tad is Tiffany's boyfriend. He has a go bag at the end, and we always talk about flight. Well, why would Tad, if he's not involved, have a go bag exactly to take off? You know, that's so you always look at these bookends of the situation. Like this case doesn't begin in March. In my opinion, it begins probably way farther back with some of the custodial filings and the claims that are made, but really begins when she buys those burner phones. Like that's a pretty clear picture. Like it's game on at this point. So it's a great case for the prosecution. But when you have 5 defendants, boy, that's 5 cross-examinations. That's 5 at least lawyers. Death is potentially on the table, so each defendant could have 2, maybe 3 lawyers. That is a full courtroom.
And they do.
That's a full courtroom. So.
Yeah, no, they do. I know Tiffany for certain has 3 lawyers. And Tiffany actually, on one of the affidavits, it said that Tiffany admitted to everything and they have a recording of it. Paul, just going back to, Paul was at Tad's house when Tad was arrested. So it's interesting that he was not arrested on the spot either. He had a bandaged pinky finger that he told them that he hurt himself working on his truck. And then this dumbass actually asked his neighbor how a man could get him and his family to Mexico. He actually asked that, speaking of your flight. And then he
consciousness of guilt, right?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. And then he asked, he was worried about having DNA on him or how long DNA lasts in churned dirt because, I was at the Twombly's house and I'm just worried that, something might have gotten on me and I'll get arrested. And like his neighbor is just like, what? Yeah, no, that's a no for me, dog. And he went straight to the cops.
It's like they had 6 weeks at a minimum to plan this thing.
Yeah.
Did they think they were going to get away with this? Like,
They're
this
so
is
dumb.
the
They're
worst
so dumb.
planned kidnapping and murder. In my experience, I mean, it's totally botched. Everybody's essentially talking. Anyway, and that's not to take away from the tragedy of this thing, but my God, I don't know where these guys thought they were going with this. Like, clearly they're going to be looking at Tiffany Adams. They knew exactly where Veronica and Jilian were going that day.
I know. No, you're right. It's all so insane. And when they first went missing, I mean, I just dove in. I was searching for anything and everything. And that's when I found all of the records, the family court records, and they ended up, the state ended up sealing them, I think 2 days later, because they had way too much information on there, information about minors. So again,
that's a wealth and those court
time.
records, and you're smart to look for that stuff, Lauren, because that stuff is like protections from abuse. In relationships, those domestic records, they're a treasure trove of evidence that could ultimately be used in a prosecution. But if you were writing this as a fiction, wouldn't you say, like, can't we make it a a little better where the evidence isn't so compelling against these people, or they don't screw up at every turn?
Yeah, no, I know. And I really believe, Jarrett, that we are going to see more people arrested, like Lacey and Barrett Cook. There's no way they did not know about this. They were part of God's Misfits as well. They were said to have their meetings at Lacey and Barrett Cook's house. Lacey and Barrett and Paul Grice also wrote this stupid 44-page document of nonsense, sent it to Antony Blinken, stating that they are not sovereign citizens of the United States. That, God, at one point on page 1003, Paul writes that his children are his property. They come from his sperm. Like, this guy is off.
Well, I've dealt with those sovereign citizen challenges in the past in court, where defendants were claiming these things, and courts. I think they're more common than we think, those kind of defenses, but courts deal with them pretty quickly. Those claims are, they're dispelled pretty quickly. But one of the things we talked about too, though, Lauren, is all 5 of these individuals, at least at this point, are coming into court together and will stand trial together. And you say, like, how in the blue hell are you going to put a trial on against 5 defendants?
This was Wednesday. I'm sorry, not Wednesday. This was last Wednesday. This was the most recent pretrial hearing that you were speaking about. So I want to get to this because that is confusing. And I want you to explain what you explained to me. I've been sending you these docs and saying, hey, what does this mean? What does that mean? In terms of discovery and in terms of evidence, I'm like, well, wait a second. Why are they pushing this back? Why are they giving so much extra time? What's going on? And so far, they've ruled on a gag order. And they've ruled that the manner of death cannot be released for another 6 months. So that would be probably 4 months from now, because they ruled on that in May. And so the last hearing was last Wednesday, and all 5 of the defendants, like you said, are allowed in the courtroom together. And that is blowing a lot of people's minds.
Well, so they have the right to hear the evidence against one another. They're charged as co-conspirators. So. Right. And in this conspiracy, they're all on the hook for each other's crimes, essentially. So if you look at this as a prosecutor, if I have 5 co-defendants, and I've had cases, not homicides with that many co-defendants, but particularly like drug kind of cases where you have just a multitude of defendants. I've had homicides where you have 3 co-defendants, though, and they've been tried together, or the pretrial stage, they're together because they have that right. Essentially, evidence against one of the co-conspirators is evidence against the entire conspiracy. So any proceeding that's happening, they all have the right to be there. So accepting that fact, accepting the fact that you don't want to go through this 5 different times for 5 different defendants, not because you're lazy, because strategically, it's take 1, take 2, take 3, take 4, take 5. At some point, a defense attorney is going to start picking apart what they're expecting you to say. There's judicial economy where a judge is going to say, I'm not clogging my docket with 5 different hearings. all of these issues are the same, particularly at pre-trial. They have not really taken a defense yet. If they start pointing the finger at each other, if Tiffany Adams says this was Grice's idea or vice versa, and their defenses are what we call antagonistic, at that point the trial could be severed, okay? Also, it gets a little bit tough when Grice makes a statement, Adams makes a statement implicating the other, okay? And there's rules about how those statements can come in. Like Adam's statement can obviously come in against her. What impact could it have against Grice if she mentions him and he didn't admit to that portion of it? So it gets very, very complicated when you're presenting a case like that. In my opinion, right now it's smart that they're all together. The courtrooms are big enough, believe it or not, they could accommodate 5 defendants. It's easier that way. And as the case evolves and develops, if they are tried together, it means their defenses are not antagonistic. They're consistent. What I'm predicting, though, is 1, maybe 2 of these individuals will come to the table, cut a deal, and testify against the remaining defendants, which in all likelihood is going to happen here.
I so agree. And I don't want anybody to have it easy, I guess, or take the easy way out here, but I so want the worst for Tiffany Adams. I'm sorry. I am beside myself still about this case. These 2 women should be alive. 6 children are left without mothers, and it just eats at me on a daily basis. It really does. I cannot get over it. So I'm really
I would imagine she's the target of this thing. So
Yes,
I would be looking to cut a deal with individuals, not that any of them have less responsibility under the law, but there are certainly individuals involved in this conspiracy that I would say weren't necessarily, there's only like one ringleader typically, right? So you identify that target, and then like we talked about, the hierarchy in Diddy's case or anybody else, you kind of identify that and you pick or approach people that you think will help you prove your case against that individual. And then what kind of a deal can you give? I mean, you have 2 victims here. It's like, it's not going to get better than life imprisonment for the testifying witness in this case. I could tell you that. So I can't imagine, you know, they may be motivated by their consciousness to come clean because they are making admissions already, or some kind of a placement in a certain type of prison. I really don't know, but I cannot see Grice or anybody else getting much of a deal here.
And let me ask you this. So they're charged with 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of kidnapping, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. Is that going back to what you said about the 6 weeks of planning? Is that like a conspiracy
Well, you can
charge?
form a conspiracy in a very short amount of time. But what I think the larger question is, why 1 count of conspiracy but 2 murders and 2 kidnappings? Because the conspiracy itself was the agreement to kill and to kidnap Jilian and Veronica. So you don't have, it's not a conspiracy to kill. I think arguably you could probably charge it that way, but the conspiracy is the agreement to commit those crimes, and those underlying crimes are an element of that conspiracy. So you often see it charged that way. So you have 1 or 2 or more people making an agreement to commit a crime and then taking steps in furtherance of that crime, whatever it is. If it's the actual killing itself, if it's being the getaway driver. It sounds like Veronica and Jilian were diverted off the roadway in this case. And if that diversion was created and led to where the vehicle was found, that set the table for the murder. So by diverting them, you know exactly what's happening here. You're as responsible. We talked about the driver and the drive-by shooting kind of situation. So there is levels of participation in the conspiracy, but ultimately those are substantial acts that led to the deaths. So they're on the hook for the murders themselves. And it sounds like they all participated in significantly in some form or fashion.
They did, but per the affidavit and Tiffany's admission and Cora Twombly's daughter, they absolutely all participated. How long usually, typically, is a prison sentence for the conspiracy to commit murder?
Well, you're essentially sentenced for the underlying crime. So a conspiracy to commit murder could be life.
Oh, because I'm thinking, well, are they just trying to tack things on to get more time for them, or
No,
I don't understand.
well, that's
I
a
guess.
great question. That's a great question because yes and no. Number one, you don't have to charge that conspiracy, but charging it allows for you to establish in your presentation the back and forth, the nature of the relationship, the planning between all defendants, and you would say, Judge, this is evidence of the conspiracy. So, and you could talk about so much more. It just makes so much more of the evidence relevant when you're talking about the nature of these relationships and the communications they were having between them. Even if it was just Grice and Adams at one point, or the Twombly's talking to Adams, all of that feeds into the larger conspiracy here. Conspiracy is a pretty significant crime because you're punishing, number one, the underlying crime, but you're punishing the guilty mind and the agreement. You know, bad enough when one person goes bad in society, right? When you got two coming together, that's what conspiracy punishes. You know, that's like the theory behind, we can't have people committing crimes and then we can't have people agreeing to do it together. Like, we got to punish that conduct.
So
and that's what that charge is. That's what that charge is.
So true. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Well, the judge ordered at the last hearing that until the time of the discovery is finished, a status hearing regarding discovery will be held every third Wednesday of the month. So the next hearing is July 17th. And I guess they're going to figure out and discuss whether the preliminary hearings will be held jointly moving forward, or it was just that one time. But based on what you said, I'm going to go ahead and assume it's going to be all five together, because you're right. That is a lot to do that 5 different times for the same exact things, unless, something else comes up.
It's the rights of the accused, and then it really puts the DA at a disadvantage. And one of the things you asked me, and I didn't get to yet, was what's going on with this discovery stuff, and one of the motions that you sent me. So the judge in this case set initially a really ambitious discovery schedule. So and the fact that they're meeting every third Thursday, I think the judge, what is it, Wednesday? So the judge really wants to stay on this case and keep it going. He doesn't want, everything in the law, I always tell people, it's 30 days to do this, 30 days to do that. The judge is holding the parties' feet to the fire, acknowledging that this is a massive case. There's a lot of moving parts. We need to meet every couple of weeks to kind of get a to-do list, establish a schedule. That's great. I think it's going to keep everybody on their toes. But when the judge initially set an ambitious discovery schedule, and what that means is basically he's saying to the Commonwealth or to the state, you need to provide all of this evidence as soon as possible. And the state's saying, whoa, Judge, we don't even have all this stuff yet. We don't have it all back yet. We'll give them what we have. This is typically what we do. And I've had cases with just large amounts of discovery, and people say, like, how hard is this process? It's a tedious process. All discovery has to be, and discovery is the reports, the evidence, the testing, the chain of custody information. Basically everything under the sun related to the case. All those domestic filings, you can bet they're all in discovery. So all of that has to be logged, numbered, provided to 5 defendants. Like, it's enough to provide it to one person. You got to provide it to 5, make sure they receive it, meet with them, give them the stuff as it's coming in. So it's a Herculean task here to get the discovery done in this case. But they'll get it done, and I think that's why the judge wants to meet with them as regularly as they've planned it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because this case in particular, as I stated, new pieces of evidence are coming out every single month on these court docs. I mean, it was like 2 weeks ago, they're looking into cars registered to Tad Cullum's mother and other tractor trailers. And they're, like I said, I think more people are going to be arrested. I think that they're not going to be finished with discovery until the fall.
None of the evidence that's coming out,
this is crazy.
None of it is good for God's misfits. And like they name these cases the Kansas moms. Like, how did they miss the chance to call this one God's Misfits? That's what this case should be called.
They do. I feel almost disrespectful when I say God's Misfits a lot, only because to the moms, to Veronica and Jilian, to the victims. I feel a little bad, but you're right. I mean, this is also a movie waiting to happen.
Well,
and if
they're quite a crew, let me tell you. And if anybody is,
they're disgusting. They're so gross.
They certainly look like misfits, and acted accordingly. Let's put it that way.
Well, if you look at some of the before and afters of Tiffany, I mean, this is pure speculation, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say I think she likes the meth, because she looked not bad a few years ago, and now she looks like she was beat with the old and ugly stick. So, but no, and I say that because she was pretty before, but something's going on there. But again, that was also why I thought this trial is going to take, or it's going to take forever for this case to get to trial. Do you agree with that?
This one's going to take a long, long time because of those discoveries.
You think 2025?
Here's the other thing. Every one of those 5 defendants has the right to file all of their pretrial motions. It's just the DAs have their hands full here too. I mean, it's just a ton. Mm-hmm. You could have the best case in the world. You still got to prove it. You know, even if the defense says nothing, with 5 defendants, they're going to have a hell of a time just putting this case on and getting to the point where you can put it on. So it's a massive lift. Trust me, I've had cases like this. It's just, you never stop thinking about it. And as, you know, a brick is not a wall, they say, right? Every brick just keeps coming in, and you build that wall over time, and you say, this is what it's going to look like. I remember when I'd have a case like this, I would write everybody's name on a sticky note, and I would lay them all out on the floor in front of me and just kind of move them, building the chronology. And when that was done, I started to then organize my thoughts and my exhibits based around that. But to get to that point, you have to have all these people interviewed. You have to get their reports and their exhibits ready to even sit down and have that floor process. I think I have a picture of myself sitting on the floor, surrounded by.
Oh, I want to see that.
It was like a bad hair day too, I think.
One last question: do you think that this is? It's going to take until 2025 for this to go to trial? Like that long?
Easy. Probably 26.
Oh, really?
No. Oh, absolutely. This will be long after Kohlberger, and God only knows when. We'll find out when Kohlberger's going. Well, he'll get a new trial date on the 27th, but this one is going to be at a minimum 2026. I'll bet you $1,000.
Whoa! Wait, and do you think it's also because of the death penalty?
All of those things.
And
all of them.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, it's 2026 at least.
Oh my gosh, that's disappointing to me. I think I figured as much, but I'm just so anxious for justice in this case that I'm like, damn it.
It's going to take time.
Damn it.
It's okay.
Time. I think we've depressed everybody enough for one episode. What do you think?
Yeah, probably. This is some heavy shit.
Yeah, no, it is. And I promise that we will continue to provide updates accordingly for both of these cases, because I feel it. I feel that justice is coming. So I think that is a positive aspect.
And we wait for Karen Reed's verdict still. And I know we said we pre-recorded, not that far in advance. We're like a day away.
Yeah, no,
so
just a day.
We all
just
know,
a day.
Right? But Lauren, as always, it's a pleasure.
Thank you, Jarrett. It's always such a pleasure. We have to do this in person soon, okay?
You got it.